World of Warfare presents
Little Friends of World War II. Partly because of the grim realities of trench warfare and bloody standoffs throughout the First World War, post-war military theorists began to examine the potential of aviation as a means to hasten the end of hostilities in future conflicts. Hans von Seeckt, one of the leading figures in the post-war German army of the 1920s, envisioned aerial bombardment as a clear game-changer in future engagements. However, World War I was followed by 20 years of relative peace, which allowed aviation theorists to develop untested notions about how aerial bombardment might determine the future outcome of war. Known collectively as the bomber mafia, hotbeds of military aviation theory developed in the 1920s and early 1930s in such places as Maxwell Field in Alabama, as well as French and Italian military think tanks, which attempted to stay abreast of the near staggering advances in aviation technology. From 1927 onward, the Italian journal Rivista Aeronautica became a pseudo-forum for Italian aviation theorist Giulio Douhet, while in the States, aviation leaders like Billy Mitchell, Ira Aker, Carl Toohey Spaatz, Jimmy Doolittle, and Henry Hap Arnold led the way in the creation of interwar air doctrine. Others in England, including Lord Hugh Trenchard and James Sprat, attempted to dissect the lessons learned from the First World War, while at the same time envisioning the future of strategic aerial bombardment. The ability to fracture enemy morale seemed compelling to theorists like Liddell Hart, who studied the psychological trauma evoked by the German bombing of Londoners during World War I. Giulio Douhet also studied the impact of the London bombings, suggesting that the great cities of Europe constituted the most delicate and susceptible part of the enemy. After studying the many press reports linked to the 1917 London bombings, Douhet concluded that the majority of Londoners had become incensed by their government's inability to shield them from German air attacks. In theory, Douhet went on to speculate, angry mobs in bombed-out cities had the potential of forcing their governments into a state of capitulation when faced with enemy bombardment, forcing an early surrender that might well save untold future lives. As war loomed yet again over the European continent, the American members of the bomber mafia tightened up their aerial bombardment doctrine for the U.S. Army Air Corps. In their view, bombers could inflict damage on the enemy like waves of the sea. Defensive fighter planes would soon exhaust their fuel and cease their attacks on long columns of invading bombers, that or be neutralized by the defensive weaponry employed by American bomber crews. In their minds, at least, a heavy bomber's effectiveness and destructive capacity could not be stopped by enemy anti-aircraft fire or fighter interdiction. Nicknamed Big Friends by World War II Allied fighter pilots, who in turn became known as Little Friends by Allied bomber crews, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator became the primary warbirds that ultimately bombed Germany into submission, at the same time destroying important German cities responsible for Nazi weapons and vital supplies, leading to the destruction of 3.6 million dwellings, as well as the deaths of an estimated 300,000 German civilians. Bombing Axis countries without escort fighters proved to be an early and quite harrowing bloodbath for the 8th Air Force, flying out of a vast number of air bases throughout the United Kingdom, deeply challenging morale, commitment, and the legitimacy of daylight strategic bombing without fighter escorts to and from the initial point, or IP. In the first 10 months of her existence, the 8th Air Force lost 188 Liberators and Flying Fortresses, costing 1,900 crewmen their lives. Roughly 73% of the airmen who arrived in Great Britain in the summer and fall of 1942 would not complete their tour of duty, which at the time was set at 25 missions completed. 57% were either killed or missing in action, while another 16% were killed or wounded in crashes in Great Britain, or permanently grounded by physical or emotional disability. By war's end, the 8th had suffered more than 26,000 fatal casualties, approximately 1,500 more lives than were lost by the U.S. Marine Corps over the course of World War II. In a few short months of war, the pre-war doctrinal concept of the self-defending heavy bomber had swiftly become reduced to a costly, blood-soaked fiction. Losses continued to mount unabated, and on August 17, 1943, 60 bombers went down in attacks on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, representing an unsustainable loss rate of 16%. In October, the 8th sustained a 20% loss rate during what airmen soon referred to as Schweinfurt 2, which at the time made it statistically impossible for an airman to complete his 25 missions. If daylight bombing was to continue her early yet unconvincing start, then the Army Air Corps needed a way to dramatically reduce her abysmal attrition rates. Nearing the end of this first disastrous year of combat, in December of 1942, the 8th began to cobble together solutions to the issue of long-range fighter escort coverage. Aircraft manufacturers redesigned 3 fighter aircraft with enlarged internal fuel capacities, while the arrival in late 1943 of the P-51 Mustang proved to be a game-changer in terms of superior fighter performance and escort range. Regarding ongoing bomber vulnerabilities, at the beginning of 1943, 8th Air Force Commanding General Ira Eaker proposed the addition of a machine gun-equipped nose turret after the Luftwaffe began focusing their attacks on the unprotected forward quarter of B-24s and B-17s. That same month, Brigadier General Haywood S. Hansel suggested that until nose turrets could be added to the heavy bomber fleet, fighters should position themselves in front of bomber formations in an effort to thwart German frontal attacks. While Allied heavy bombers delivered a withering stream of destruction against Axis infrastructure and war-making resources, the success of the Allies' strategic bombing campaign could not have been possible without its growing armada of fast-attack fighter aircraft. While many dozens of different fighter designs were employed throughout both major theaters of war, 3 American-made fighters dominated the skies in both the European and Pacific theaters of operation: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and the North American P-51 Mustang. Lockheed designed the P-38 in response to a February 1937 specification request from the U.S. Army Air Corps, known as Circular Proposal X-608. Authored by Benjamin S. Kelsey and Gordon P. Seville, the request sought a twin-engine, high-altitude airplane for the tactical mission of interception and attack of hostile aircraft at high altitude. Specifications pushed for a maximum airspeed of at least 360 miles per hour at altitude and a climb rate to 20,000 feet within 6 minutes from takeoff, the toughest aviation objectives the USAAC had ever called for. The Lockheed design team, under the direction of Hall Hibbert and Clarence Kelly Johnson, considered a broad range of twin-engine designs before settling on twin booms to accommodate the tail assembly, engines, and turbochargers, with a central nacelle for the pilot and armament. The XP-38 gondola mock-up was designed to carry 2 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 200 rounds per gun, or RPG, 2 30-caliber Brownings with 500 RPG, and 1 T Army Ordnance 23mm autocannon with rotary magazine, all with a combined rate of fire of 850 rounds per minute. Lockheed's design included a tricycle undercarriage and a bubble canopy, employing 2 1,000-horsepower turbo-supercharged 12-cylinder Allison engines fitted with counter-rotating propellers to neutralize the effects of engine torque. The P-38 Lightning embodied the first American fighter plane to use stainless steel and smooth, flush-riveted, butt-jointed aluminum skin panels. The finished product exceeded the expectations laid out in Circular Proposal X608, chiefly in that the P-38 became the first military aircraft to exceed 400 miles per hour in level high-altitude flight. Nicknamed the Fork-Tongued Devil, the P-38 soon proved itself to be less than acceptable for use in the ETO, while its greatest air combat contribution was achieved in the Pacific theater. In most combat-related situations over Europe, the P-38 displayed less maneuverability than its more agile adversaries, such as the Messerschmitt 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. In addition to agility limitations, the P-38's engine performed poorly in extreme cold or high humidity, which proved to be near constant conditions during European winters. On February 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force Fighter Command reported that 40% of its 114 P-38s were grounded with engine trouble, while more than half of all P-38 losses in the ETO were directly related to engine failure. One of the Army Air Corps' main fighters throughout the war, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, affectionately known as the Jug, was produced from 1941 through 1945. The plane boasted 8 50mm machine guns and could carry 5-inch rockets known as HVARs or Holy Moses, or a bomb payload of 2,500 pounds. When fully loaded, the plane weighed 8,000 pounds, making it the heaviest fighter ever produced during the war. The Thunderbolt was powered by an 18-cylinder, 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine, which was also employed in 2 U.S. Navy aircraft, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat and the Voigt F-4U Corsair. With the increased fuel capacity available in later models of the P-47, the fighter was able to escort heavy bombers on raids deep into Germany, while additionally operating as a strafing bomber on the return leg of a mission. Its bull-like airframe and tough radial engine could withstand significant damage, yet still deliver their pilots safely back to base. From D-Day until VE Day, Thunderbolt pilots claimed to have destroyed 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. After the American wing of the bomber mafia concluded that full mission fighter escort was technically out of reach for Allied bombing missions, German-born Edgar Schmid answered the call by designing the P-51 Mustang for North American Aviation Company. Before immigrating to the United States, Schmid had worked for Willy Messerschmitt, assisting with the development of the Me-109, a plane that had already shot down more Allied aircraft than any other enemy fighter. In 1941, while American air leaders continued along with their collective head in the sand, North American Aviation delivered the first P-51 Mustangs to the British. The plane's underpowered Allison V1710 engine made it unsuitable for high-altitude flight until an American air attaché based in London suggested that the P-51 might well be made into a high-altitude fighter by upgrading her power plant to a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 engine. Combined with a laminar flow airfoil, range-extending drop tanks, and a true beast of an engine, the P-51 Mustang quickly became the Allies' long-range fighter escort of choice. In late 1942, after American air leaders had witnessed the hybrid plane's immense capabilities, the Army Air Corps placed an order for 2,200 aircraft. When the P-51 Mustang first arrived at 15th Air Force bases in Italy and 8th Air Force bases in England, several early deaths by friendly fire occurred due to the Mustang's profile similarities to the Me-109. Soon after these first casualties took place, bomb groups began scheduling visits by early P-51s so that heavy bomber gunners could develop identification techniques that avoided future losses of a plane that soon became the king of the jungle in World War II combat aviation. By May 1944, 6 months after the first Mustangs reached the 8th Air Force in England, North American Aviation delivered an improved model which incorporated 108-gallon drop tanks. Mustangs could now escort their big friends on 1,700-mile round trips into Poland at speeds approaching 440 miles an hour at altitudes of up to 40,000 feet. During the Mustang's first 3 months with the 8th Air Force, the P-51 scored more kills than the P-47 Thunderbolt at an incredible 3-to-1 ratio. All fighter groups within the 8th soon transitioned to the P-51, sending their P-47s and P-38s to tactical strafing units, which were used to soften up German troop, transportation, and industrial positions prior to the Allies' planned invasion of northern France. The P-51 Mustang also proved to be financially less burdensome on the American taxpayer's wallet. In 1943, a P-51 cost $58,824, while the lesser-performing P-38 rang in at a whopping $105,567. The Jug nearly matched the cost of a P-38, with a price tag of $104,258. By the end of the war, more than 15,000 P-51s were built, compared to 15,636 P-47s and 10,037 P-38s. As American fighter ace Don S. Gentile recalled, the plane put the Huns right up against the wall. In fact, the Mustang was such a game-changer for the Allies, it more than likely saved the daylight bombing offensive when merciless attrition rates threatened to force the Americans to adopt the RAF's area night bombing policy. Despite its many superior attributes, the Mustang was not without its problems in flight. Herschel "Herky" Green of the 325th Fighter Group, already an ace with 9 kills in P-40s and P-47s, had this to say about his experience flying the P-51 Mustang. Pilots reported getting into a turning duel with an enemy plane and suddenly finding they were having to push forward on the stick with all their strength to keep the aircraft from turning tighter and tighter before entering a high-speed stall. Several stated that the aircraft had stalled and snapped into a spin from which they felt fortunate to escape. For those fighter pilots who flew both the P-47 and the P-51, the differences were subtle yet glaringly apparent. In a written recollection, Major Bill Chick, the CO of the 325th Fighter Group, had this to say about the two planes. The Mustang was a lady, and as long as you treated her like a lady, she was fine. But if you abused her, she would let you down. The Jug was an old whore. The more you kicked her around, the more she loved you. She used up all your money or fuel in a hurry, but she would still give you a hell of a ride, even if the cops or enemy aircraft were knocking at the door. Not the kind of gal that you wanted to take home and introduce to your mother, but always fascinating and fast. Approximately 41,452 Allied fighter planes were lost in the ETO during the course of World War II, while the Pacific Theater saw the loss of some 14,533 fighters. Despite the increasing effectiveness of long-range fighter escorts in the later years of the war, heavy bomber losses in the ETO exceeded more than 10,000 aircraft, with another 2,500 lost in the Pacific Theater, Far East, China, India, and Burma fronts, making little friends of World War II, some of the gutsiest aviators of the Second World War.